Now, 1/3 of the lumber used in U.S. home building comes from Canada. Drywall, or it's called gypsum, is largely made in China and Mexico, so you'll see prices go up there too. A builder industry trade group representing the big public builders said the tariffs will increase the cost of a new home anywhere from $7,500 to $10,000 per home. Now, the chief economist at Realtor.com today said that the entire market, including existing homes, could get hit as well by all this.
The U.S. Commerce Department is hiking anti-dumping duties on Canadian softwood lumber to 20.56%.
Overnight, disaster struck the U.S. timber industry. A collapse so severe it shook Wall Street, froze construction projects, and sent shockwaves into American homes. Timber giant Weyerhaeuser saw profits sliced in half in just one quarter, a direct hit from Trump's 25% tariff on Canadian lumber. And this crisis isn't stopping at boardrooms. It's already pushing up home prices, stalling new builds, and leaving millions of families fearful about the future. On August 1st, 2025, Washington's tariff deadline hit with full force, locking in a 25% duty on Canadian softwood lumber and pushing the lumber war to its fiercest stage in decades. This wasn't a surprise move. It stacked on top of earlier duties. The 14.38% in anti-dumping and countervailing tariffs, bringing the total burden dangerously close to 40% as August began. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick stood firm, saying there would be no grace periods, no extensions. His words became reality, and the impact was immediate. Lumber shipments slowed, buyers hesitated, and markets turned volatile within days. U.S. mills celebrated the tariffs, arguing they were long overdue to stop what they call unfair Canadian subsidies. One industry group claimed the new rates finally gave American producers a fighting chance. But Canada was caught off guard. For the first time in decades, Ottawa is opening weighing export quotas, something it has resisted for years. Prime Minister Mark Carney has already warned that Canada will not bow to U.S. ultimatums if jobs at home are put at risk. Trade Minister Dominique LeBlanc pointed to Canada's $1 trillion stake in U.S. pensions, hinting that Ottawa still holds powerful leverage. Meanwhile, U.S. senators who rushed north through July have failed to secure any breakthrough. With the deadline now passed, the standoff has hardened. This is no longer just a tariff dispute, but a full-scale trade confrontation. The lumber war is no longer a looming threat. It has arrived, and its consequences are unfolding in real time. America's trade gamble has already claimed its first major victim, and the damage is spreading fast. On July 24, 2025, Weyerhaeuser, the largest U.S. timber giant, shocked Wall Street by reporting profits cut in half, dropping from $173 million to just $87 million in Q2, a staggering 50% fall tied to weak lumber demand and the looming tariff regime. Revenue slipped 3% to $1.88 billion, narrowly above analyst expectations, but earnings per share missed badly, triggering an immediate investor sell-off. Executives confessed on the earnings call they expect another $60 million hit in adjusted profit in the next quarter, proving the collapse isn't one time. The cause is clear: weak housing demand, oversupply, and soaring costs under Trump's reckless 25% lumber tariff. Industry warnings had flagged rising costs well before the drop. Instead of protection, U.S. tariffs have created chaos. Lumber and OSB prices lost traction, builder sentiment collapsed, and new projects froze. Rather than shielding jobs, Washington's actions backfired, undermining its own timber champion. Weyerhaeuser tried to look strong, buying new timberland, expanding engineered wood operations, and approving a $100 million stock buyback. But these moves felt desperate, aimed at calming investors rather than recovery. Analysts were blunt, calling it the perfect storm, created by a U.S. policy that punished American firms as much as Canada's. What was sold as protection for U.S. mills has instead crippled its biggest timber producer and thrust the industry into turmoil. And the collapse of Weyerhaeuser is only the beginning of a larger crisis set to hammer the housing market and millions of American families. The collapse of America's timber giant quickly spilled over into the housing market, exposing how fragile the system had become under the weight of tariffs. In May 2025, U.S. single-family home sales dropped 13.7%, the steepest decline in nearly 3 years, as families backed away from rising mortgage rates and higher lumber costs. Builders warned that tariffs could add as much as $14,000 to the price of a new home by 2027, versus under 6 months a year earlier, leaving developers with too many unsold homes and buyers priced out of the market. The ripple effects were severe. Construction projects slowed or were halted entirely. Suppliers of wood, nails, and cement all reported slimmer margins, while sawmills cut shifts and workers faced layoffs. Instead of stability, Washington's policies fueled uncertainty. Lumber prices swung wildly week to week, forcing builders to delay projects until markets calmed. Even the National Association of Home Builders warned that tariffs were choking the industry rather than saving it. And while U.S. officials claimed higher duties were protecting local producers, the reality was that the entire construction pipeline, from forest to foundation, was grinding down. Every slowdown added costs, and every cost was passed to the consumer. For young families trying to buy their first home, for builders stuck with rising bills, and for workers fearing lost jobs, the U.S.-Canada tariff war has already turned the American dream of affordable housing into a distant memory. While Washington celebrated its tariffs, Canada quietly prepared a counterattack that struck at the heart of U.S. influence. Trade Minister Dominique LeBlanc reminded Americans that Canada holds more than $1 trillion invested in U.S. pensions, a figure that could grow by $100 million annually. Leverage Ottawa isn't afraid to hint at in talks. He didn't threaten to pull the money, but the message was loud and clear. Canada has power beyond softwood lumber. Prime Minister Mark Carney was even sharper, saying no deal would be signed unless Canadian jobs were protected. He dismissed U.S. ultimatums as political theater and warned Ottawa would not bend under Washington's pressure. At the same time, Canada began exploring export quotas on softwood lumber, something the U.S. has pushed for years but Canada once resisted. Now that trade is choked, even this old demand is being raised anew. Canadian exporters are already moving fast. In just 1 year, the share of Canadian lumber going to the U.S. fell from 78% to 68%, as shipments redirect towards Europe and Asia, signaling that Canada no longer relies on Washington to buy its timber. New trade talks opened in Brussels and Tokyo, with eager buyers seeking fair supply. Every ship leaving Canada for Europe or Asia sent Washington a sharp message. Their control over Canadian lumber is slipping. By shifting export routes and pointing to its deep financial reach, Canada turned rhetoric into real strategy. And unlike the United States, which is scrambling to fix its own trade damage, Ottawa is playing the long game, building new partnerships that could leave America sidelined in its own backyard. As Canada moves with strategy, the United States is rushing to patch the damage with a risky plan of its own. The Trump administration announced a 25% increase in federal logging quotas, opening protected lands once shielded under the 2001 roadless rule, in a bid to revive timber output. It was billed as a bold push to boost domestic supply, but experts warned it would add less than 1% to the national timber pool, a mere trickle compared to the scale needed. Across rural mill counties, gaps remain wide. Some timber firms are investing in automation and robotics to cut costs, but these efforts can't offset shrinking demand and soaring tariff costs. Ironically, Canadian lumber companies are relocating, building new mills in the U.S. South to avoid tariffs, while still selling into the American market. At the same time, U.S. environmental groups filed lawsuits accusing the administration of sacrificing forest protections for political gain, delaying any real supply boost. Legal battles expected to drag on for years. So while Canada diversifies markets abroad, the U.S. is trapped, cutting deeper into its forests for minimal relief. The supposed logging revival now appears less like recovery and more like a desperate race against time, and one that America is already losing. The U.S.-Canada lumber war is more than tariffs. It's a struggle that is already shaping the cost of homes, the stability of jobs, and the future of trade for years to come. Subscribe now to stay ahead of every twist and turn in this escalating trade fight, every shock in the housing market, and every shift in global supply chains that could change the way America builds and lives.